Hello everyone, and welcome to the Tome of Silver, the show where I randomly select a game from my collection, review it, and add it to an ever-growing ranking list. Normally when starting a video, I like to give a little bit of history or introduction to help set the stage for the game we'll be discussing. But here, it feels a bit redundant. Pokémon is the video game franchise, and I've already done brief overviews of the Pokémon series in both my Explorers of Sky and Red and Blue videos. So I'll keep this one simple. Guess what? Those Red and Blue games? Yeah, they sold about 7 bajillion copies worldwide and were immensely popular, kickstarting Pokémon fever. Nintendo would have been insane not to follow up on the series' momentum with a new game. Since companies like money, Nintendo gave us Pokémon Gold and Silver, released in Japan in 1999, and coming to North America in 2000, a shorter wait than we had for the localization process for Red and Blue. Gold and Silver, which I'll be referring to as Gen 2 for the remainder of this review, to avoid confusion with the name of the rival character, were developed for the Game Boy Color. The Game Boy Color was the successor to the Game Boy, which allowed games to have, you're never going to believe this, color. It would take us to a brand new region, with 100 new Pokémon to catch and battle, compatibility with the first two games, and all with a new pop of color. Red and Blue were already amazing video games. They just have a few growing pains which show their age. With just a few necessary tweaks, Gold and Silver had the potential to be timeless. So, are they? For the record, I'll be playing Silver version, as I'm contractually obligated as per my channel name. Without further ado, choose your starter, step into the closest route, and let's turn the page to Pokémon Gold and Silver for the Game Boy Color. Gen 2 brings us to the Johto region, based on the Kansai region of Japan. Our adventure begins in New Bark Town, continuing the ever-familiar trend of playing as a young trainer living with a single mother. And I thought the mom in Kanto had it bad, not even having her own bedroom. In Johto, she doesn't even get to have her name on the house, with instead it being under the name of her 10-year-old son.
That's gotta hurt.
We're called to the lab by this region's professor, Professor Elm, who needs help delivering a package a few routes over. To keep us safe on our trip, Professor Elm allows us to select one of 3 Pokémon to accompany us. I selected the water type, Totodile. We venture to our package's recipient, Mr. Pokémon, who's being visited by none other than Professor Oak. Professor Oak gives us a Pokédex, hoping we can help him find and record data on the Johto region's Pokémon. With our errand complete, we make our way back to New Bark Town. Along the way, we run into a rude, red-haired kid, who broke into Professor Elm's lab and nabbed a Pokémon. Conveniently, his stolen Pokémon is whichever one has a type advantage against ours. Much like Blue in the previous game, we can name this boy whatever we wish, although he's canonically referred to as Silver in other media.
That name's stealing son of a bitch.
Silver attacks us, wishing to test his new Pokémon, though we thankfully manage to fend him off. We return to a distressed Professor Elm, who sees we received a Pokédex. Elm encourages us to go on an adventure, even letting us keep the Pokémon he lent for the delivery. From here, Gen 2 plays out much the same as Gen 1. Our goal is to explore the Johto region and raise a team of Pokémon to defeat the 8 gym leaders. Once we obtain all 8 gym badges, we'll be permitted to fight the Elite Four, the strongest Pokémon trainers in the land, and earn the title of Pokémon Master. The Johto region is a fantastic setting. Developer Game Freak put a lot of attention into giving Johto a sense of history and culture. Plenty of NPCs have stories to tell about landmarks in the various towns, with some sounding reasonable to others sounding as if they were folk tales that became exaggerated over time. Many of the legendary Pokémon have earned myths and legends surrounding them, adding a compelling air of mystery to the region. This makes Johto far more engaging than I found Kanto to be. Whereas my desire to explore Gen 1 came from finding Pokémon, Johto made me want to explore because everything around me was so interesting. Finding new Pokémon along the way was just icing on the cake. On our journey, we'll encounter the returning Team Rocket. Team Rocket has been left in a state of disarray following the team's dissolution by their boss, Giovanni. They plan on restoring their organization to its former glory, by conducting all manner of schemes to turn a profit. Throughout our adventure, they start by cutting off Slowpoke tails to sell for consumption, Jesus, and use a radio frequency to cause Magikarps to prematurely evolve into Gyarados, as Gyaradoses go for far higher prices. This is all just to acquire funds. However, the real endgame is to take control of the Goldenrod radio tower. With it, they'll send out a transmission across the land to contact Giovanni and have him return as their leader. I found the Team Rocket portions to be one of the weaker aspects of Gen 2. The team is much less organized than they were before, and the way they seem to scramble from one plan to the next makes them appear kind of pathetic. I have no doubt this was intentional. The point is supposed to be that Team Rocket isn't what it used to be. But that doesn't change that it makes for one of the weaker overarching antagonists in a mainline game. I also have to question if their master plan would have even worked. After all, it was the very boss they're trying to call back that disbanded the team in the first place, so what's changed since then to encourage Giovanni to come back? Even if he did return and was too strong for our player character to defeat, it's only been 3 years since the events of Gen 1. The trainer that defeated Giovanni the first time is still alive, so what's stopping them from coming to Johto and kicking Giovanni's ass a second time? It's just not all that great of a plan, and Team Rocket never felt more than 2-bit criminals. Alongside Team Rocket, we'll also face off against Silver several times. Silver acts as our rival throughout the game. Where Team Rocket was a step down from Gen 1, our rival is a big step up. Blue from Gen 1 was already a great rival. He acted as a terrific motivator for us to get stronger. The only area he was really lacking was in his character. Gen 2 remedies this by making Silver into a fully realized character, who learns and grows alongside you. When you first meet him, Silver is power hungry, caring only about making his Pokémon strong, while looking down on those he views to be weak. He didn't even need these personality traits for me to have immediate beef with him, considering he's the reason I named my trainer Tome instead of Silver. You see what you've done to me? Of either titles to take your name from, you had to pick Silver instead of Gold. Look at the channel name. It's not called Tome of Gold now, is it? However, he later has a wake-up call after suffering a defeat at the hands of the Elite Four champion Lance. Lance berates Silver for his narrow-minded thinking and uncaring method of raising his Pokémon. He tells Silver he'll never become a great trainer unless he changes. Silver at first shrugs this off, but as he continues to lose to the player who raises their Pokémon with love, he begins to have doubts. Soon, Silver's cruel and hateful personality starts to soften, as he tries to fight with his Pokémon as companions, not just tools. In my opinion, Silver is bar none the best rival in the entire Pokémon series. Unlike Blue, he has an actual character arc, learning and growing just as the player is. Later rivals will also have proper character arcs, but they're usually portrayed as the player's friend, wanting to battle just for fun. This is okay, but hardly pushes the player to want to improve. Meanwhile, Silver maintains the traits Blue had that motivated the player to surpass him. At first it's because he's an arrogant jerk you want to knock down a peg, but following his character development, the rivalry becomes more cooperative and respectful, with both trainers pushing each other to reach greater heights. It's an effective rivalry, and I think it's one of the few times Pokemon has struck the perfect balance between making the rival feel like an ally to the player while still acting as an obstacle to overcome. Alongside new Pokemon, Gen 2 introduced new evolutions to Pokemon from Gen 1 as well. One such Pokemon is Golbat, which can now evolve into Crobat. Instead of reaching a certain level, a Golbat can only evolve once it has a high enough friendship. Friendship is a mechanic that measures your bond with your Pokemon. It can only be raised by performing specific actions. For much of the game, Silver has a Golbat on his team. However, after you beat him at Victory Road and begins to reevaluate himself, later encounters show his Golbat has become a Crobat. This is an effective use of show don't tell. It visually shows Silver's development, and demonstrates he's serious about changing his ways. It's great stuff. At first, Gen 2 appears to be a shorter game than Gen 1. By the time I reached the Elite Four, I had only played for about 20 hours, compared to Gen 1's 25. However, after beating the Elite Four, it turned out that Gen 2 had a pretty massive surprise hidden up its sleeve. Upon starting the game again, your trainer is called to Professor Elm's lab, where he gives us a ticket for a cruise ship. What's this cruise ship's destination? The Kanto region. That's right, we get to return to the Kanto region from Gen 1. This provides us an opportunity to catch region-specific Pokemon, and even battle against Kanto's 8 gym leaders. This makes Gen 2 the only game to have 16 gym badges to obtain. It was so cool getting to return and see how everything has changed 3 years after the events of Gen 1. We see returning gym leaders with aged up designs, and even some brand new leaders. For example, the Poison Gym leader from Gen 1, Koga, is now a member of the Elite Four in Johto. As such, his daughter Janine has stepped up to take over as the new gym leader. That's so cool! The inclusion of the Kanto region makes Gen 2 feel like 2 games packaged in one, sending it skyrocketing in content and replay value. There's just one rather baffling caveat that comes with it. The ship that allows you to travel between Kanto and Johto is only usable 2 days a week, Wednesday and Sunday. While I was exploring Kanto, I realized I hadn't encountered any of the legendary Pokémon, and wanted to go back to Johto to get some footage of them. However, I was told the ship wasn't available that day, and would need to wait until Sunday. I was recording on Thursday morning. Why? Why would they restrict access between regions like this? This essentially made me trapped in Kanto until the next available day. If there's something you need to get from one region, you're barred from obtaining it until the game allows you to go back. It's a dumb idea that only serves to act as a progression blocker. Gen 2's gameplay is identical to its predecessor at a base level. You explore the various parts of the Johto region to find and catch new Pokémon. Once you have yourself a team, you can raise and level up your Pokémon to have them become stronger. If you've played Red and Blue, you can jump right in without any trouble. The core gameplay has undergone no major overhauls, and honestly, it didn't need to. Gen 1's gameplay was already fun and naturally addicting, so Gen 2 only needed a handful of minor adjustments to fix some of the more lackluster elements, while adding some bells and whistles. This is exactly what it did. The most immediately noticeable change is the improved sprites, which take advantage of the Game Boy Color's expanded color palette. I also found the battle sprites to be a marked improvement, notably how it seems greater attention was placed on shading. The addition of visible shadows and highlights made Pokémon appear less flat, letting the Pokémon design shine even brighter. There are 100 new species of Pokémon introduced, alongside some returning favorites from Red and Blue. With additional Pokémon comes a renewed incentive to travel every inch of Johto in hopes of finding and catching them all. Personally, Gen 2 is one of my least favorite gens in terms of Pokémon. I know. Funnily enough, 2 of my all-time favorite Pokémon, Crobat and Scizor, debuted here. It's just overall, I found only a few of these new critters ended up appealing to me. That's not a point against this game, as what Pokémon you like and dislike is purely a matter of taste. I certainly can't deny that they're still all very well designed. Honestly, I think the mascot Pokémon of Silver version, Lugia, is one of the best designed legendary Pokémon in the entire series. It uses a minimal amount of design elements to keep its appearance simple and memorable, while still giving off a powerful and mythical appearance. It's really well done. As stated earlier, some returning Pokémon got some new evolutions, including my noted favorites Crobat and Scizor. Some even got new pre-evolutions, or as they're also called, baby Pokémon. A major feature introduced in Gen 2 is breeding. If you leave 2 compatible Pokémon at the daycare, you may return and find out that they
got busy!
And leave an egg. You can add this egg to your party, and it will hatch after walking a certain distance. Pokémon hatched from an egg can learn moves otherwise unavailable to them if caught in the wild. It adds a new avenue for players to experiment if they're interested, while providing some cute new designs for a handful of Pokémon. Another new feature introduced is the day and night cycle. At the beginning of the game, you'll be asked to match the clock in your trainer's room to your real time of day. Doing this will allow the in-game environment to reflect the day and night accordingly. Certain Pokémon can only be caught at certain times, such as the owl Pokémon Hoot Hoot, only appearing at night. This is a really nifty feature. It not only provides a bit of extra immersion as you watch the sunrise and set as you travel, but also adds to the concept of Pokémon in general, them being living creatures with their own habits. Like, of course the owl Pokémon only comes out at night. That's perfect. Night is also your best chance to possibly find some of the new Dark-type Pokémon. As stated in my Gen 1 video, the first Pokémon's type balancing left a lot to be desired. Psychic types were disgustingly overpowered, while Ghost and Dragon types had limited weaknesses. To level the playing field, Gen 2 introduces Dark and Steel-type Pokémon. These were both very welcome additions, fitting in nicely with the existing types. I'd still argue that Psychic types are too strong in this gen, but Dark and Steel Pokémon do help make them less of the indomitable force they were before. The last major new addition to Gen 2 was the Pokégear. The Pokégear is like Pokémon's version of a smartphone. Alongside making calls, it contains a map of the region and a radio to listen to radio shows. The phone is likely what you'll be using the most. It not only lets important characters contact you throughout your adventure, but you can also register the phone number of other trainers. You'll sometimes get phone calls from these trainers, either just to make general conversation, or to challenge you to a rematch, allowing you to refight those trainers again, something that couldn't be done in Gen 1. Honestly though, I regretted registering a trainer's number as soon as I did it. I found the phone calls to be way too frequent, and you don't have the option to not answer calls, bringing my progress to constant halts. I didn't even last an hour before I decided to just delete all the numbers off my phone. The chance to refight a trainer was not worth the constant interruptions of having to listen to a picnicker tell me how the grass type somehow beat a normal type because of a type advantage. Bullshit, picnicker. Grass types aren't super effective against normal types. Who do you think I am? I hate you, stop calling me! While Gen 2 made numerous welcome improvements to the Pokémon formula, it's not without its issues. These issues are both problems not resolved from Gen 1 and new ones exclusive to Gen 2. Problems carrying over from Gen 1 are the limited inventory space and hidden machine moves. The inventory is improved somewhat. The bag is divided into sections for particular item types, rather than just one bag for everything. But even with these sections, I still frequently found myself running out of space and needing to throw items away, especially from mid-game onward. Meanwhile, hidden machines have gotten worse. As a refresher, HMs are moves that are necessary to teach your Pokémon to traverse the overworld, and cannot be deleted outside of a unique NPC. Gen 2 has not only kept the same HMs from the previous game, but has also added 2 more, Whirlpool and Waterfall. So now there are even more moves you may not want to give your Pokémon, or worse, the Pokémon in your party may be unable to use said HMs, meaning you'll need to change around your entire party layout just to progress. HMs sucked in Gen 1, they suck here, and will continue to suck in the future. For me though, the biggest problem Gen 2 has is its awful level scaling for trainers. When you first start your journey, the level of enemy Pokémon is fine, matching the level of my Pokémon pretty decently. However, around the halfway point, these levels start to slip. Most trainers fell below the average of my team, making fights significantly easier when they should be getting more difficult. The worst example is the Team Rocket Grunts at the Goldenrod City radio tower. This occurs near the end of the game, and by this point, my Pokémon were in their mid-30s, while the Grunts were still in the low to mid-20s. Despite the sheer amount of Rocket Grunts present, each fight was dull and presented zero challenge. But then, once you finish the radio tower, it'll only be a short while before you're challenging the Elite Four. The Elite Four is a ridiculous jump in level on the opposite side, beginning in the low 40s and ending against level 50s. I welcome the challenge these stronger opponents presented, make no mistake, but why such a jump? If someone wanted to match the Elite Four in levels, they would need to grind a bunch of wild Pokémon, something that could have been avoided by buffing up the previous Rocket Grunts. More thought needs to go into the level range of trainer Pokémon, because it wrecks the challenge of the game, which is such a shame. One final thing to note is that a year following Gold and Silver's release, a third edition of Gen 2 was made, Pokémon Crystal. Crystal version is essentially Gold and Silver with a bit more spin and polish. This version allows players to finally play as a girl trainer, an option that will become a permanent staple for every game going forward. Some Pokémon have received updated sprites, along with some minor animations when you encounter them. The biggest addition is the alteration to the story. Crystal adds the character Yucine, and gives the legendary Pokémon Suicune a prominent role in the plot. Crystal also has a cavalcade of minor tweaks. I won't spend time listing all of them, but in people's eyes, Crystal is often seen as the definitive experience for Generation 2. It does have a few missing Pokémon that can only be obtained in Gold or Silver, so it doesn't render the previous versions completely redundant. On the whole, I would say the additions and alterations made to Crystal are not enough to warrant a purchase if you already have Gold or Silver. But if you're new to Gen 2, and Gold or Silver doesn't have an exclusive Pokémon you want, Crystal is likely the way to go. The second generation is a tremendous leap forward for Pokémon. Yeah, not every problem I had with the previous games have been fixed, but they are more than bearable when taking into consideration everything else Gen 2 does. I appreciate them making attempts at adding character development to the plot, and the addition of Dark and Steel types helped even out an already remarkable combat system. Pepper in the fact that the content is almost doubled with 2 whole regions to explore, and you have a stellar follow-up to one of the Game Boy's best games. Pokémon Silver will rank at the number 24 spot. Gen 2 is an impressive step up from the previous titles, and I can appreciate a lot of the new additions it includes. It's just a pity I myself am not a huge fan of Gen 2's Pokémon, which prevents this title from being among my personal favorites in the series. Still, a phenomenal game, and absolutely worth any Pokémon fan's time. And that's all for this video. If you enjoyed it, please consider giving it a like. It goes a long way to help out the channel. Who's your favorite Gen 2 Pokémon? Let me know down in the comments. Next time will be our year-end video to cap off 2024. God, how quickly time passes. In that video, we'll get to see the full ranking thus far, as well as an announcement or two on some ideas I'd like to include in future reviews. Please look forward to that. In the meanwhile, thank you all so much for watching, and may we see each other again when we turn to the next chapter in the Tome of Silver.